his secondary, but it really feels like a non-cohesive strategy because he switched over to his secondary deck, which has taken out Super Collider, one of the best cards that Warrior has in his arsenal against Mage.
Now, that being said, he does remove 4 cards that are not so good versus Mage. It takes out an Archivist Luciana, takes out a Militia Commander, a Baleful Banker, and an Eternium Rover. He gets to add in 2 copies of Augmented Elic, a Weapons Project, a Shield Block, and a Darius Crowley. So I see his reasoning, but I feel like maybe this was just thought out poorly ahead of time, which is Darius Crowley's going to serve us well against Banana Buffoons, Mirror Image, Sorcerer's Apprentice, etc. The Augmented Elics serve good against Mage because you get to add some pressure.
Yep.
However, you're removing Super Collider, which is a major tool in the matchup.
I agree. And I think especially when your opponent is, well, actually, okay, this is where it gets a bit more interesting, is if it was against, if he knew that Fino was going to stick to his primary deck for whatever reason, which he never would, he'd probably stick to his primary deck as well. Maybe because Fino is switching over to his tertiary deck, which is fairly slow, fairly greedy, with the Hexlord Malakras thrown in there and the Archmage Antonidas, because he's taken out some of the tempo cards in his deck, like Frost Nova and Banana Buffoon, SilverName is trying to capitalize on that by just killing him, by saying, you're the control deck now, I'm just going to get you with LX and curving out with bombs every turn.
It's a true story. I mean, for Fino's tertiary deck, he also removes Ziliax and 2 copies of Rabble Bouncer.
That's a lot of anti-aggro.
And he adds in a Hexlord Malakras, 2 Astromancers, a Power Creation, and an Archmage Antonidas. I would almost argue, though, that makes you more vulnerable to Super Collider in that regard.
It does.
Although stronger against it in the long term. So why go to the long term if you're SilverName?
It's a bold strategy, Admirable. Let's see
if it pays
pans
off.
out.
Other thing to mention, too, is that I think SilverName is quite confident that Fino will be keeping Harrison Jones.
Yes.
In the opening hand. We also saw Fino do that yesterday.
We did, I remember it.
And if that's going to be the case, Super Collider, I think, is a bit vulnerable to Harrison Jones. However, you've added in a Weapons Project, and you still have 2 Wrench Calibers in the deck.
Yeah. Like, you know as well, though, that he's not adding in Ooze, because while Fino has Ooze in his secondary deck, secondary is purely for Rogue. He would never switch to his secondary deck against Warrior.
SilverName contemplating Omega Assembly, perhaps? It could be trying to just send Fino a message that that's a card other than Omega Assembly.
Well, I mean, it's in keeping with his game plan of switching to his secondary deck, right? Where it's just playing out his cards quickly and not trying to take things through to the late game.
So then the plan would be Omega Assembly, find a mech to secure on board, and then go into Ziliax.
Which he's got.
I mean, that would be the consideration for Omega Assembly.
Yeah.
It's interesting. SilverName certainly has a unique playstyle that it contrasts a lot with what I'm used to seeing. That doesn't mean it's better or worse. I don't think Hearthstone is a right or wrong game. I think Hearthstone's more of a grading scale. And when I look at the way that SilverName plays, it is very much a risk versus reward style of play, which I am almost always an advocate for.
Right, and I think one other thing I want to add in his favor is it's a weird style of play. I agree, it's not something I'm used to, but he plays with conviction. He's sticking to his game plan here. You know, if he was to go for a more tempo route and then suddenly switch over to playing value, playing control, going for the late game, that I would not like. But this style, he's saying, I'm curving out, this is a tempo deck, we're playing for it.
This is a really big talking point too, because when you look at game plans overall, I think one of the biggest mistakes players can make is deviating from a game plan before they have a very real, concrete reason to do so. There's a certain point where you got to change gears. Everybody knows that's going to crop up in a game of Hearthstone. However, when you think about it in totality, you have to have good evidence to do that. So when you start to go down a road, you have to follow through.
Yes. And so far, that is definitely what we're seeing from SilverName. Fino here going with the Harrison Jones to remove the Weapons Project, which makes sense. He needed to cycle through his deck. At the time, his hand really wasn't doing much of anything.
It was a stinker.
It really was. But now, with that one Harrison Jones, it has absolutely flipped on its head. Next turn, we could see Mountain Giant Conjurers calling, even if he wanted to, with a Elemental Evocation and a Mana Cyclone thrown in there as well.
I do think this works out in SilverName's favor, though. He gets to answer back with Harrison Jones and then Shield Slam the opposing one. This was a really well planned out turn.
Yep.
And I think this setup started with the turn 4 Omega Assembly, where SilverName knew if he found something like Omega Devastator, he was going to be off the Ziliax plan. But he gave himself an open option. Go into the Weapons Project, and then, you know, after the dueling Harrison Jones, you snag tempo by using a Shield Slam.
And again, it's in keeping, right? It's just keeping the board, getting in that chip damage, and trying to close it out with bombs later on.
Now, that being said, I'm curious how much the Augmented Elec could possibly change that plan. Perhaps now you're on more of a conservative traded up plan. The problem I see with that is if SilverName lets his Harrison lives, the Shield Slam becomes almost a moot point anyway without the second weapons project being invested.
Oh, well, he could quite happily invest the second weapons project, though, just to power up the Shield Slam.
It delays the Wrench Caliber, that, though.
Oh, okay.
That's playing against
Okay.
the idea there. I think SilverName is in a really tough spot here. And I think a lot of it boils down to, does he think that Fino's going to trade, or does he think that Fino's going to go face?
The problem is that contrary to his previous game, he doesn't have brawls to catch up if his opponent does go wide on board.
I think that means Shield Slam. I also think that Fino is a player who tends to capitalize on damage when it's available. And SilverName has to know that.
What do you mean like that? He likes to go face.
When you can secure damage, you secure damage.
Oh, he does.
When your biggest minion on board did not get checked, that's typically a sign that you can get aggressive.
That's a big draw, though, now from SilverName.
Yeah, it's really scary, though. He has nothing to back this up with. He has nothing to add. At what point does that need to get out there and rolling?
Right.
He has to bridge over to this Omega Devastator and find a way to take advantage of the tempo there.
Okay, so let's look at how he does that then. On this turn, Brawl is far from necessary. We could just see Ziliax on this turn in order to take out one of the 7/8 Grave Horrors.
This is interesting because the Augmented Elec is demanding some attention, lest SilverName get 2 more bombs shuffled into Fino's deck. He's getting to check one of these right away.
Ziliax can be saved for when he's actually damaged as well, to get a little bit of lifesteal as well, which is a big
on
deal.
10, the Omega Devastator Ziliax.
Good point. Very good point.
So I think SilverName
I like
has a solid game plan here, and the Augmented Elec, I think, is providing a lot of disruption to Fino's game plan right now.
And also, I guarantee you that SilverName considered this exact turn as a possibility when he shield slammed the Harrison last turn.
Yes.
Because he's thinking, okay, 6 mana, my opponent goes Mountain Giant, Conjurer's Calling a vast majority of the time. If they can do that, they will. And so then I have 5 attack on board, 3 from the Wrench Caliber as well, perfectly sets out this turn.
And I don't think Fino had a different way to set up that turn. Like, you know, SilverName's trying to take advantage of something like that, or at least, you know, try to bring it to parity anyway. And oftentimes when your opponent has clearly set up for your best turn, talking about those deviation points, that's a time where you can consider deviating. Fino just didn't have a way to do that, so he had to follow through.
And here we're seeing Fino go for a big old reload on his hand. His hand is still just looking pretty juicy, to be honest. It's all big threats, card generation, card draw.
And the big one for me is these Mana Cyclones, what they're doing is they're just juicing up cards in hand for the Astromancer.
Oh, yes. Drawing bombs early when you're at a healthy life total is exactly what you want as well.
SilverName, I think, is now officially in trouble.
Yeah.
He has 1 Brawl. He has a Warpath, which does not service this turn. And Fino's about to roll into 2 Astromancers. So how do you bridge the gap to turn 10 and then also take advantage of your turn 10? Like, this is a colossal task.
Okay, I mean, there are ways that he can get there, right? So if we were to see Brawl on this turn, because this is a pretty scary board, you're going to be taking a lot of damage if you don't. And then assuming he wins by getting one of the 3 good options off the Brawl, next turn he could just go Omega Devastator Ziliax. He doesn't have to save that for turn 10 if things are looking really scary.
So my question is, does he need to brawl right now? Because if he brawls right now, Fino develops on turn 8, and then on turn 9, what do you do then? So I'm curious, because he's got Omega Devastator and Ziliax, can he wait a turn, tank the damage, and then brawl to bridge the gap to 10? Because then on 10, he takes this damage, he brawls on turn 9, he goes into turn 10, and he has Omega Devastator Ziliax, clears out the major threat, and then restores health.
I think he had to just pray that he wins this Brawl, because if you leave Fino with 16 damage on board, he is just going to be chipping away every single turn. He's not going to overcommit, and as you can see,
bad
SilverName
news
there.
for SilverName.
He is not happy to see those bombs. He wanted to wait for Blast Master Boom to come out of the deck, get all those boom bots, and then have his opponent.
That damage is just not relevant right now.
Yep, doesn't make a difference quite yet. Wow.
Yep, it's that one. He's been cropping up a lot lately.
We're seeing a lot of Stegatron this weekend, the unofficial mascot of the Grandmasters League.
You see where I was alluding to, though. SilverName was slated to take 18 damage there from 33. So you would add 1 to that for the hero power. So he's taking 19 damage from 33. He'd have 14 life left. He'd brawl this turn. He's safe from the single minion attack, and then he goes into Omega Devastator Ziliax. Is that ever enough to recover is the real question.
But the difference is negligible in either way you do it, because, so say he hadn't brawled on turn 8, if you assume that Fino is clever enough to not overdevelop on the following turn, you're brawling the same amount of stuff next turn anyway, so you've taken the same amount of damage.
It's the timing, though. Like, now what does he do this turn? That was my concern.
Well, he chunks damage. He chunks the damage now that he would have done last turn anyway.
But this turn, so Fino gets another message that you don't have a brawl, and now gets to overdevelop.
Yeah.
It's a really weird setup.
Really weird. It's really weird.
I don't think SilverName's in good shape either way. And I think that drawing second brawl is probably a necessity anyway. Yeah. And so I'm just trying to see if there a way he could have squeezed out that 1 extra turn. And we talked about this yesterday too, being, pretty overly critical and nitpicky. But I think when you're talking about the best players in the world, that's what you have to do.
Yeah. I think what he did. I don't know.
I have no problem with it.
I think taking the 18 damage that it would have been, it's just too much. He had to hope he got lucky there off the brawl, and he just didn't. And so now, what is this? Still 18 damage yet again on this turn for Fino. And a whole bunch of survivability with this board as well. With the damage Stegatrons not even dying to an Omega Devastator. That's when you know you're in trouble. And it does look like Fino might be smelling blood here, because he is very happy to play out these little minions that are very bad against Brawl. And he's throwing in the Sea Giants. Yep, he knows what's up now. Like you said, this was all the information he needed.
And for SilverName, the Explodinator is to set up for a Brawl draw. I mean, his intention here is to draw Brawl.
And then win it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fine out. It's very unlikely to happen, but he's very unlikely to win this game.
When luck shuts the door, you got to open up the window. We got one more door to check.
So there's still a secret in play, which could be counterspell from where SilverName is sitting. So if he goes Omega Devastator to kill off one of the Giants, and then Ziliax on top of it.
It's just not enough.
Yeah.
So he's going to check here for counterspell.
Yeah, and then he's going to try and draw to Brawl.
He's not try to draw to Brawl.
Yeah.
Wise.
I think this is a good idea.
Nope. A valiant effort, but Fino is going to secure this in a very decisive fashion.
I think there's only 2 bombs in his deck now at all, because I think he drew all the bombs in his deck previously. So even in the absolute perfect scenario here, I don't think SilverName has a chance.
That's right. Fino, quick 2-0 to open up the day, and is doing work with Mage here in week number